Hey, welcome back to the program. Checking in some economic data, inflation data for June. Yesterday we had the CPI. Today, Wednesday the 16th, we have the PPI, the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, the PPI, the Producer Price Index. How's inflation in June? Well, before I get started, I just want to point out one thing, and that is intellectual consistency. Intellectual consistency. Data came out past few weeks. We had unemployment data, jobs data, inflation data. And I noticed that the right-leaning media, the conservative media, the pro-Trump media outlets are really finding little pieces of these data releases to say, hey, Trump is doing great, Trump is doing this, Trump is right. And yet the data that's been presented is really no different from what we saw during Biden so far. There was a lot of excitement over the June non-farm payroll report that showed an increase of 147,000 jobs. If that was a Biden number, that same media would have been dissing that number completely. But it was a Trump number, so this is great. No recession, Trump's doing fine. And the same thing on the inflation data. Obviously, Trump campaigned on bringing prices down, so everyone's very sensitive to that. Democrats are finding any reason to indicate the prices have not fallen. Republicans looking for any reason to indicate prices have fallen. And it's the same thing that happened here with the CPI data from yesterday. So when we look at data, we want to evaluate, of course, the details of the data, but we also want to evaluate how it comes out with respect to expectations. And so yesterday, Tuesday, CPI came out at 8:30 a.m. from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the month-over-month number for June was 0.3%. And that was as expected, based on 30 or so different economists that evaluate these data and provide forecasts. And it's essentially an average of those forecasts. 0.3% was expectations against 0.1% in the prior month. So as expected for the month of June, but up from the month of May. Year over year, June CPI was 2.7% against expectations of 2.6%, and against the year over year number in May of 2.4%. So based on those headline numbers, clearly inflation data has ticked up a little bit. The rate of change in the CPI index has gone up higher in June than it did in May. On a year-over-year basis, we still see we're well above the Fed's 2% target in the medium term. But what we also get when we get these CPI releases is we get something called the core CPI, or we'll look at the core PPI, the Producer Price Index. And what we do there is we take away food and energy to try to get a look at the underlying inflation data. And one of the reasons we do that is because food and energy prices are determined on international markets, which are highly volatile, driven by speculation. And so we take those away to see the underlying rate of inflation. So the core CPI. Headline still matters. Core gives us a little bit more information. The core CPI for the month came out 0.2% against expectations of 0.3%. So there's a lot of hurraying over the fact that the core number month over month was 1/10 lower, yet it was still 1/10 higher from May. And then the same thing for the year over year number for the core CPI. Year over year, 2.9% against 3% expected, but against 2.8% in May. So not surprisingly, the Trumpers, the right-leaning media, those advocating and supporting Trump and want to indicate that his plan is working to bring down prices, jumped on that core CPI month-over-month data point, 0.2% against 0.3%. And again, if this was the opposite, if this was Biden in office, those same people would have been looking at the headline numbers, the year-over-year numbers. And what we can conclude is we still have an inflation problem. The Fed's job is not done. As I've been saying for months and months and months, the Fed should remain on hold. They have a meeting at the end of this month. Expectations are they'll remain on hold. One of the driving forces for that is the idea that Chairman Jerome Powell wants to wait to see what the tariff impacts are. And let me tell you something about the tariff impacts. We've definitely seen increased revenue to the Treasury as a result of tariffs. No doubt about that. You can look at the Treasury budget statements on that. If you can find someone in this country, even someone in the Trump administration, that can tell you exactly where tariffs are right now, given all the back and forth of the Trump administration for the past 4 months regarding tariffs, I'll give you $100. What I am suggesting is the impacts of potential tariffs have not impacted the economy yet. We have not yet shown up in the data because the tariffs aren't really in place yet. We don't know really where the tariffs are. There's been talk of this 10% across the board tariff. So to the extent that tariffs are in place and maybe going higher, we haven't seen the effects of that yet. And so it's too early to say, This CPI data indicates that tariffs are not inflationary. Tariffs don't have to be inflationary. They're likely to be inflationary. And so anyways, a little headline information there on the CPI data. And so for the month of June, for all urban consumers, the index was up 0.3%, year over year up 2.7%. And the drivers for the data, as you can see here on the screen, were food overall, led by food away from home. Anyone that eats out can attest to that. Driven by energy services, electricity up 5.8%, utility gas service up 14.2%, used cars and trucks prices up 2.8%, services less energy services up 3.6%. Those are year-over-year numbers. So we don't have a lot of negatives for June compared to May. Only two of the all items indexes, new vehicles and used cars and trucks, were negative in the month of June. Everything else was positive, up from 0.1% to as high as 1%. Electricity was a big driver in June. Again, inflation indicates the rate of change in the index. As long as the inflation rate is positive, that means the index is still rising and inflation is going higher. The Fed's target is 2% on a year-over-year basis in the medium term. We're not there yet. Fed should remain on hold. Now, this morning, Wednesday, the 16th, we got the producer price index for the month of June. This was a little better news, no denying it. Better news for PPI. And something we can hang our hat on here. PPI, the producer price index, how the prices of producers' goods and inputs have risen. Month over month, the PPI for June was unchanged, against 0.2% expected, against 0.3% in the prior month. Year over year, PPI up 2.3% against 2.5% expected, against 2.7% in May. And then we look at the core number again, taking away food and energy, on the month over month basis, unchanged against 0.2% and 0.4% in May. And then year over year, 2.6%, a touch better than 2.7% expected, in the 3.2% in May. So definitely good news on the PPI level that we can all hang our hat on. And clearly no indication of impacts of tariffs in that data. So definitely good news for the Trump team on the producer price index. Not so great news on the CPI, but still okay. We're moving in the right direction still, but the Fed does not have room to cut rates. This data does not give Trump any more ammunition to attack Powell or push Powell out. And again, they're trying to push Powell out. His term ends in May of next year. He's on the Board of Governors, I think, through 2028. So there's talk of a process already underway to replace him. There was speculation he might quit. I hope he doesn't quit. Let him stay in his position through May. Trump's off base on this attacking the Fed. Anyway, a little insight into the producer price index out today, Wednesday, and the CPI index out yesterday, Tuesday. But good news on the PPI, moving in the right direction. That can spill over to the CPI. Obviously, that's the connection point between the producer and the consumer. So maybe we'll see some lower consumer prices in the month of July, but so far not the case. And the right-leaning media, conservative-leaning media, trumping this up a little bit too much. Not a huge gain here. Not something that Trump can say, haha, I told you. Too early to tell. All right, that's all I have for you right now. Always try to buy American.